stepped off the transport shuttle and felt the weight of a dozen alien stares pressing down on her. The landing platform of the Galactic Defense Academy stretched before her like a metal ocean, gleaming under the twin suns of Prime. She was small compared to the other recruits gathered there. Small, brown-skinned, and very clearly human. A group of stood nearby, their massive forms casting long shadows across the platform. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms folded across their broad chests. Their skin was thick and gray, like stone that had learned to move. One of them turned to look at, and she saw something in his yellow eyes that she had seen many times before. It was not hatred. It was not fear. It was dismissal, the casual certainty that she did not belong here. Kept walking. The Galactic Defense Academy was the finest military training institution in the Coalition. It drew recruits from 17 different species across 4 star systems. They came with their legendary strength, able to crush metal with their bare hands. They arrived in groups of 3 or 4, their minds linked by natural telepathy that let them move as one perfect unit. They enrolled with their enhanced eyes, able to see in spectrums that human minds could not even imagine. Each species brought something extraordinary to the Coalition's military forces. Humans brought nothing. That was what everyone believed anyway. Humanity had made first contact with the Coalition barely 20 years ago. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, they were infants taking their first steps into a room full of giants. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were primitive. Their bodies were fragile, short-lived, and utterly unremarkable. The only reason the Coalition had accepted humans at all was politics. Earth controlled a strategic jump point, and the Coalition needed access. Accepting a few human recruits into their institutions was a small price to pay. Knew all of this. She had heard the whispers on the transport. She had read the articles written by Coalition academics, explaining why humans were biologically unsuited for military service. She had seen the statistics showing that human recruits had the highest dropout rate of any species in Academy history. None of it mattered to her. She was here and she intended to stay. The orientation hall was a vast circular chamber with seating arranged in rings that climbed toward a domed ceiling. Found a seat near the back, away from the clusters of alien recruits who had already formed groups based on species. She noticed 2 other humans in the hall, a man and a woman, both sitting together on the far side. They glanced at her but did not wave her over. Understood. In a place like this, humans could either stick together and be seen as weak, or spread out and try to blend in. There was no good option. An officer stepped onto the central platform and began speaking. His voice was translated through the small device clipped to his ear, turning his clicking language into flat English words. He explained the Academy's history, its expectations, and its rules. Listened with half her attention while studying the other recruits. They were easy to spot, their massive bodies taking up 2 seats each. They sat with the casual confidence of beings who had never been physically threatened by anything in their lives. They were harder to count because they sat so close together that their slim, blue-skinned bodies seemed to merge into single units. Their large black eyes reflected the lights of the hall like pools of dark water. They sat straight and still, their cybernetic eye implants glowing faintly in the dim light. Each one had been enhanced since birth with technology that made their vision superhuman. Had none of these advantages. She had 2 eyes that could barely see in the dark. She had 2 arms that could not crush metal. She had a mind that was locked inside her own skull, unable to reach out and touch anyone else's thoughts. By every measure that the Coalition used, she was inferior. But had something else. She had history. She had the weight of 10,000 years of human warfare sitting in her memory, passed down through generations of soldiers who had learned to kill with nothing but rocks and sharpened sticks. She had the blood of survivors flowing through her veins, the descendants of creatures who had clawed their way to the top of a death world using nothing but cleverness and stubborn refusal to die. The Coalition did not know what that meant. They had never needed to learn. The first week of training was physical conditioning. Struggled. She could not keep pace with the in-strength exercises. She could not match the in-coordination drills. She could not compete with the in-visual acuity tests. Every day felt like drowning, like being pushed underwater while everyone else breathed easily. The recruit named was the worst. He was not cruel exactly, but he was loud. He laughed when dropped from exhaustion during a running drill. He made comments in his own language that his translator did not bother to convert, though his tone made the meaning clear enough. To him was a joke, a political favor wrapped in soft human skin. Did not argue with him. She did not complain. She simply got up each time she fell and kept moving. It was all she knew how to do. On the 8th day, the marksmanship evaluation began. The recruits gathered at a massive firing range that stretched across an open plain behind the main academy buildings. Holographic targets floated at various distances, glowing blue against the brown landscape. Each recruit was issued a standard coalition pulse rifle, a sleek weapon that fired concentrated energy bolts with pinpoint accuracy. Took her rifle and found a station at the far end of the line. She examined the weapon carefully, turning it over in her hands and testing its weight. It was well designed, built for species with different body structures. The grip was too wide for her fingers. The stock was shaped for shoulders broader than hers. The sight was calibrated for eyes that could see things hers could not. She could work with it. She had worked with worse. While the other recruits began firing at the holographic targets, set her rifle down and started making adjustments. She pulled a strip of cloth from her pocket and began wrapping it around the barrel and stock. She adjusted the length of the stock, pulling it shorter even though the standard setting was supposed to be optimal. She tested the trigger pull and made a small modification to reduce the pressure needed. Noticed, he stopped firing and turned to watch her with an expression of disbelief. "What is the human doing?" he asked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Is she decorating her weapon? Does she think this is a festival?" Laughter rippled through the recruits. A few glanced over, their shared thoughts clearly communicating amusement. Even the instructors seemed to pause, curious about the strange behavior. Ignored them all. She finished wrapping the rifle and set it aside, then began placing small markers on the ground around her position. Pebbles and bits of debris, arranged in a pattern that meant nothing to anyone watching. She checked the wind by holding up a piece of loose fabric and watching how it moved. She looked at the distant targets and then at the ground, as if calculating something complex. "She has lost her mind," announced. "The pressure has broken her. Someone should help the poor creature." More laughter continued her preparations. 20 minutes passed. Other recruits completed their evaluations and moved on, had not fired a single shot. The instructors began to look impatient. One of them, with replacement limbs on his left side, approached her station. "Recruit, you are required to complete the evaluation. Is there a problem with your weapon?" Looked up at him. "No, sir, the weapon is fine. I am preparing." "Preparing for what?" "The targets are at standard range, 300 meters. Any functional pulse rifle can hit them without modification." "Yes, sir, I understand." The instructor stared at her for a long moment. His cybernetic eyes whirred softly as they adjusted focus. "Then fire your weapon, recruit. We do not have unlimited time." Nodded, she picked up her rifle and settled into position. But instead of aiming at the standard targets, she turned slightly and looked toward the far end of the range. Out there, barely visible against the horizon, was a single backup target. It was used for equipment calibration, not training. It sat at 1,200 meters, 4 times the standard distance. "Sir," said quietly, "permission to engage the calibration target." The instructor's eyes whirred again. "That target is not part of the evaluation." "I understand, sir. Permission to engage it anyway." Something shifted in the instructor's expression. It was not approval exactly, but it was not dismissal either. It was curiosity. The same curiosity that had driven humans to cross oceans, to build rockets, to reach for stars they could not even see properly. "Permission granted," he said. "Show us what you can do, human." Lay down on the ground. Her body angled in a way that looked uncomfortable, almost painful. She controlled her breathing, slowing it until her chest barely moved. She became still in a way that seemed unnatural, like a machine that had powered down. The other recruits stopped their conversations and turned to watch. Even fell silent, his forearms uncrossing as he tried to understand what he was seeing. Waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. The wind shifted and she made a tiny adjustment. The sun moved behind a cloud and she waited for it to emerge again. She was calculating things that no one else could see, measuring variables that existed only in her mind. Then she fired. The pulse bolt crossed 1,200 meters in less than a second. It struck the calibration target dead center. Before anyone could react, she fired again. And again. 3 shots, 3 perfect hits. The silence that followed was absolute. No one laughed. No one spoke. They simply stared at the tiny human lying on the ground, at the rifle she had wrapped in cloth, at the markers she had placed around her position. Something had changed. They did not understand what it was yet, but they could feel it. The air itself seemed different, charged with a new kind of tension. And far away, at 1,200 meters, 3 holes marked the center of a target that most of them could not even see. The senior instructor was named Iran. He was old for his body carrying the marks of 3 different wars fought across 2 centuries. His left arm was mechanical, replaced after a battle he never spoke about. His eyes had been upgraded so many times that they barely resembled organic tissue anymore. They were chrome and crystal, designed to see things that natural eyes could never perceive. He had watched thousands of recruits pass through this academy. He had trained soldiers who went on to become legends. He had also buried soldiers who never made it past their first deployment. In all his years, he had never seen anyone do what the human just did. Iran walked slowly towards position while the other recruits remained frozen in their confusion. His mechanical joints made soft clicking sounds with each step. His enhanced eyes zoomed and adjusted, examining every detail of her setup. The cloth wrapped around the rifle to eliminate reflective surfaces. The shortened stock, modified to fit her smaller frame. The markers on the ground, positioned to track wind direction and speed. The angle of her body, designed to minimize the effect of breathing and heartbeat on her aim. He knew what he was looking at. He had seen it before, long ago, in historical records that most species had forgotten. But seeing it in person was different. Seeing it performed by a human, one of the youngest and supposedly weakest species in the coalition, was something else entirely. "Recruit," his voice was calm, controlled. "Stand up." Rose smoothly, her rifle held at her side. Her face showed no emotion. She did not look proud or nervous or afraid. She simply looked ready. "Where did you learn this technique?" Iran asked. He kept his voice low, meant only for her. The other recruits strained to hear but could not make out his words. "My grandmother taught me, sir. She served in the wars on Earth before first contact." The wars. Iran let the word hang in the air. Humans had many wars, too many to count. They had been fighting each other since before they learned to write, and they had never really stopped. The coalition had studied human history during first contact negotiations, trying to understand what kind of species they were dealing with. Many coalition leaders had been disturbed by what they found. The scale of human violence against other humans was difficult to comprehend. But violence and skill were not the same thing. Violence was chaos, destruction, waste. Skill was something refined, something that required discipline and patience and understanding. What Iran had just witnessed was skill of the highest order. He turned and addressed the assembled recruits. His voice carried across the entire range now, amplified by his cybernetic implants. "Recruits, gather around. I want you to see something." The lumbered forward, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The flowed together in their synchronized way, their linked minds sharing confusion and curiosity. They approached with measured steps, their enhanced eyes already scanning position and trying to analyze what made it special. Oran gestured at the ground around. "Look at this setup, study it carefully, tell me what you see." Was the first to speak. "I see cloth wrapped around a rifle. I see stones arranged on the ground. I see nothing that explains how she hit targets at that range." "That is because you are looking without understanding." Oran knelt down, his mechanical joints protesting softly. He pointed at the cloth. "This wrapping eliminates reflection. Light bouncing off a rifle barrel can reveal a shooter's position to enemies. At long range, even a small flash can mean death." He pointed at the markers on the ground. "These stones mark wind patterns. The recruit placed them at specific distances to track how air movement changes across the firing lane. Wind can push a projectile off course by meters over long distances. She was calculating adjustments before she ever pulled the trigger." He stood and gestured at the spot where had been lying. The position of her body minimized interference from breathing and pulse. Every living creature has a heartbeat. That heartbeat causes tiny movements. At extreme range, those movements can turn a perfect shot into a miss. She was timing her shots between heartbeats. The recruits were silent now. They stared at with new eyes, trying to reconcile what they were hearing with their assumptions about humans. Oran continued. "What you witnessed today is not standard marksmanship. It is something older, something that most species abandoned centuries ago when we developed smart tracking systems and AI-assisted targeting. We have technology that can calculate wind, distance, and movement automatically. We have weapons that adjust themselves in real time. We stopped learning these manual techniques because we no longer needed them." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Humans have a word for what Recruit demonstrated. They call it sniping. The art of making impossible shots through patience, calculation, and an understanding of physics that becomes instinct. It is a discipline that requires years to master, decades sometimes, and humans developed it not for sport or ceremony but for war." One of the recruits spoke, her voice carrying the harmonic quality of her species. "But why would they develop such a skill? Their weapons were primitive. Their technology was limited. Why invest so much effort in something that machines can do better?" Oran looked at. "Would you like to answer that question, Recruit?" Was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Machines can be jammed. Technology can fail. Power sources run dry. But a trained shooter with a simple weapon and an understanding of the principles involved can work in any conditions. My grandmother used a rifle that operated on chemical propellant. No electronics. No power cells. Just metal, wood, and carefully manufactured ammunition. She could shoot in electromagnetic storms that would disable any pulse weapon. She could operate for weeks without resupply by making her own bullets. She was never dependent on systems that could be taken away from her." "Humans learned to kill," Oran added, "at distances their own eyes could not properly see. They learned to do this with weapons made of metal tubes and explosive powder, using mathematics and patience to compensate for their physical limitations. They learned because, on their world, the greatest predator was always each other." He let that statement settle over the assembled recruits like a cold wind. The coalition welcomed humanity as newcomers, as primitive allies who needed protection and guidance. We assumed that their lack of biological advantages made them inferior warriors. Oran's chrome eyes fixed on the distant target, the one had hit 3 times. "We may have made an error in that assumption." The evaluation continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Recruits who had been laughing at an hour ago now watched her with careful attention. They had fallen silent, their natural confidence shaken by something they could not easily dismiss. They were sharing thoughts rapidly, their linked minds processing what they had witnessed. Approached when the session ended. He stood awkwardly, his 4 arms hanging at his sides, and did not meet her eyes directly. "Human," he paused, struggling with words. I spoke poorly of you before. I did not understand what I was seeing. Looked up at him. She was barely half his height, a small brown figure next to his gray mountain of muscle. You saw what everyone sees, a weak species with no natural advantages. You were not wrong about what I am. You were only wrong about what that means. Considered this. Among my people, we have a saying, strength without wisdom is a storm that destroys everything, including itself. I thought humans lacked strength. I did not consider that you might have wisdom instead. We have both, said. We learned to, we had no choice. She walked away, leaving standing alone with his thoughts. Around him, the other recruits were beginning to gather their equipment and return to the barracks. But something had shifted in all of them. A small crack had appeared in the certainty they had carried about humans. Small cracks had a way of spreading. In his office that night, Oran reviewed the recording of shots. He played them again and again, watching her preparations, her stillness, her precise timing. His enhanced eyes caught details that organic vision would miss. The micro-movements of her fingers as she adjusted for variables. The rhythm of her breathing as it slowed to almost nothing. The absolute calm in her body as she waited for the perfect moment. He had seen snipers in action. His own people had a tradition of long-range precision shooting, enhanced by their superior vision. But techniques relied heavily on their biological advantages. They could see further and clearer than any human ever would. They did not need to develop the same depth of compensating skill because their natural abilities carried them. Humans had no such gifts. Everything had demonstrated was learned behavior, techniques developed over generations to overcome fundamental limitations. It was not natural talent. It was manufactured excellence, built piece by piece through trial and error and countless failures. That was what made it remarkable. That was what made it dangerous. Oran began composing a report to Coalition Command. His fingers moved across the interface slowly, each word chosen with care. He had spent decades training recruits from species across the galaxy. He had learned to recognize potential in all its forms, and what he had seen today had potential of a kind the Coalition had never properly considered. The human species was not inferior. They were simply different, and in that difference lay something that the Coalition needed to understand before it was too late. In the barracks, lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body was exhausted from the day's evaluations, but her mind was clear. She had done what she came here to do. She had shown them something they did not expect. It was a small victory, one shot at a time, but it was a beginning. Her grandmother had taught her that patience was the sniper's greatest weapon. Not the rifle, not the ammunition, not even the skill. Patience. The ability to wait for hours, days, years if necessary, for the right moment to act, had patience in abundance. She had been waiting her whole life for this opportunity. Tomorrow there would be more training, more evaluations, more opportunities for the other species to dismiss her. But tomorrow, some of them would remember what they had seen today. They would remember the small human who hit targets they could barely see, using techniques they had never learned. And maybe, slowly, they would begin to understand what humanity really was. Not the weakest species in the Coalition, not primitive newcomers who needed protection, but survivors of a death world, forged by of war against each other, carrying skills and knowledge that had been written in blood and passed down through generations. Closed her eyes and let herself drift toward sleep. In her dreams, she stood on a firing range that stretched to infinity, and every target she could see was within her reach. The weeks that followed demonstration were strange and uncomfortable. Word had spread through the academy faster than light traveled between stars. By the second day, every recruit knew about the human who had hit impossible targets. By the end of the week, even instructors from other departments were finding reasons to visit the marksmanship range and observe her training. Handled the attention the only way she knew how. She ignored it and kept working. But the other recruits could not ignore what they had seen. The who had mocked her loudest began appearing at her practice sessions. He did not speak to her at first. He simply stood at a distance and watched, his four arms crossed, his yellow eyes following her every movement. After 3 days of this, he finally approached. "I wish to understand something." Lowered her rifle and looked at him. "Ask." "My people studied your species before the Coalition made first contact. We read your histories. We analyzed your wars." His voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "We found the records disturbing, the scale of violence, the efficiency of your killing machines. We concluded that humans were simply bloodthirsty primitives who had somehow survived long enough to reach space." He paused, his massive chest rising and falling with a deep breath. "But what I saw you do was not bloodthirsty, it was not primitive, it was controlled, patient, almost beautiful in its precision." His eyes met hers. "I do not understand how both things can be true." Was quiet for a moment. She set her rifle down on the bench beside her and considered how to answer. "Humans are not one thing," she said finally. "We are not simply violent, we are not simply patient. We are whatever we need to be to survive. When survival required violence, we became violent. When it required patience, we learned patience. When it required cooperation, we built civilizations. When it required competition, we tore those civilizations down and built new ones." She picked up a piece of cloth and began cleaning her rifle as she spoke. "My grandmother used to tell me that humans are like water. We take the shape of whatever container we are placed in. Put us in a garden and we become gardeners. Put us in a war and we become warriors. Put us in an academy full of species who think we are inferior, and we become something they never expected. Considered this. Among my people we believe that character is fixed, is strong from birth to death. Our nature does not change. We do not become new things." That sounds limiting. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is also stable, reliable, predictable. Uncrossed his upper arms and let them hang at his sides. "Your people's adaptability seems like a strength, but it also seems dangerous. If you can become anything, how do you know what you truly are?" Smiled, the first real smile she had shown since arriving at the academy. "We do not know. That is the secret the Coalition has not figured out yet. We do not know what we are capable of because we have not finished discovering it ourselves." The conversation changed something between them. Not friendship exactly, but something like mutual respect. Began training alongside, struggling with techniques his massive body was never designed for. He could not achieve the stillness she demonstrated, could not slow his four-chambered heart to the rhythm she required. But he tried, and in trying, he began to understand something about human determination that no amount of observation could have taught him. Other recruits followed his example. A group began studying preparation methods, adapting them for their telepathically linked approach to combat. They discovered that while they could not match her individual patience, they could distribute focus among their linked minds in ways that produced similar results. Two of the human recruits, the ones had avoided on her first day, finally approached her and asked if she would train with them. She agreed without hesitation. Instructor Aran observed all of this with something approaching satisfaction. He had submitted his report to Coalition Command 3 weeks ago, and the response had been exactly what he expected. Polite acknowledgement, vague promises to review the information, no real action. The Coalition was vast and slow, its bureaucracy designed for stability rather than adaptation. They would not change their assessment of humanity based on one exceptional recruit. But Iran was patient too. He had learned patience from centuries of warfare, watching empires rise and fall while he continued doing his work. He knew that change came slowly, one small shift at a time. Was a small shift. The recruits she influenced were small shifts. The reports he filed were small shifts. Eventually, those shifts would add up to something larger. He incorporated techniques into the official curriculum, not as required training, but as optional advanced instruction for recruits who wanted to develop beyond standard marksmanship. He called it primitive shooting, a term he knew would attract curious students from species who had never considered that primitive methods might have value. The classes filled quickly. Recruits who would never master the techniques still wanted to understand them. They wanted to know how a species without enhanced vision, without natural precision, without any biological advantages had developed methods that could match or exceed their own technological solutions. Taught when Oran asked her to, she showed them the basics of wind reading, breath control, and position stabilization. She explained the mathematics of projectile physics in ways that their translation devices could convert into any language. She demonstrated the patience required for long-range precision shooting, lying motionless for periods that made the other recruits physically uncomfortable. Most of them would never achieve her level of skill. That was not the point. The point was showing them that skill existed, that it could be developed through effort rather than biology, that the assumptions they had made about human limitations were wrong. As the weeks turned into months, his reputation continued to grow. She was no longer the weak human who did not belong at the academy. She was the shooter, the one who saw what others could not see, who hit targets that should have been impossible. Coalition soldiers began requesting transfers to her training sessions. Military strategists began studying her methods for potential application in electronic warfare scenarios where technology could not be trusted. And somewhere, in offices and meeting rooms across coalition space, officials began quietly revising their assessments of humanity. Graduated third in her class. The top 2 spots went to a whose enhanced eyes gave him advantages that could not be overcome through training alone, and a team whose linked minds produced coordination beyond individual capability. Did not mind. She had never expected to be first. She had only expected to prove that she belonged. Graduated 8th. His massive frame had never fully adapted to the precision techniques had taught him, but his understanding of different combat approaches had made him a more versatile soldier than any before him. He approached after the ceremony, his 4 arms extended in the formal gesture of respect his people reserved for honored warriors. "My friend, I wish to tell you something before we are assigned to different posts." Accepted the gesture, pressing her small hands against his massive palms. "Tell me." "When I first saw you, I thought you were a mistake, a political favor that had somehow been given legs and sent to waste the Academy's resources. I laughed at you. I dismissed you. I was certain you would fail." His yellow eyes were serious now, holding none of the casual contempt she had seen on her first day. "I was a fool, not because you succeeded, but because I assumed I understood what success meant. I thought strength was the only measure that mattered. I thought biological advantage was the same as worth. You showed me that I was wrong, not through argument but through demonstration. That is a rare gift." Squeezed his hands gently. "You showed me something too. You showed me that minds can change, that assumptions can be overcome. That is also a rare gift." They stood together for a moment, the small human and the massive, connected by an understanding that neither of them had expected to find. Instructor Oran found in her quarters later that evening. She was packing her few possessions for transfer to her first assignment, a long-range reconnaissance unit operating near coalition border space. "Recruit, I wanted to speak with you before you left." Set down the bag she was folding and gave him her full attention. "Yes, sir." Oran's chrome eyes whirred softly as he studied her. "I have been training soldiers for 200 years. In that time I have seen talent in many forms, natural ability, enhanced capability, trained skill. Each has value, each has limitations." He moved closer, his mechanical arm clicking softly. "What you possess is different. It is not natural ability because your species has no natural advantages for this work. It is not enhanced capability because you have rejected the technological aids that others rely on. It is purely trained skill, developed to compensate for limitations that should have made this career impossible for you." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. That kind of skill frightens some of the coalition leadership. They look at humanity and see a young species that should be easy to predict, easy to control, easy to fit into existing structures. You are showing them that their predictions were wrong. You are showing them that humanity is something they do not yet understand. Met his gaze steadily. Is that a warning, sir? It is an observation and perhaps a piece of advice. His chrome eyes dimmed slightly, an expression of sincerity. Your people have been part of the coalition for 20 years. In that time, you have been tolerated, dismissed, underestimated. You have accepted that treatment because you had no choice. But that is changing. Soldiers like you are changing it. He turned toward the door, then paused. When the coalition finally understands what humanity is capable of, they will have to make a choice. They can embrace your species as true partners with all the changes that will require, or they can try to limit you to keep you contained, to prevent you from becoming something they cannot control. His eyes brightened again. I hope they choose wisely, but regardless of their choice, I suspect you will continue to surprise them. He left without another word, stood alone in her quarters, surrounded by the few possessions she had brought from Earth, and thought about the future. Her grandmother had fought in wars that had shaped human civilization. Her mother had helped negotiate the first contact agreements that brought humanity into the coalition. Now would serve on the front lines of a galactic military, representing a species that others still did not understand. It was not the role she had imagined for herself when she was young, but humans were adaptable. They took the shape of whatever container they were placed in. They became whatever they needed to become. Finished packing her bags and walked out of the academy for the last time. The twin suns of Prime were setting, casting long shadows across the metal platform where she had first arrived months ago. She remembered the stares she had felt then, the weight of dismissal pressing down on her from every direction. She did not feel that weight anymore. She felt something else instead: possibility, potential, the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The coalition had welcomed humanity as charity cases, primitive newcomers who needed protection in a galaxy full of advanced species. They were beginning to realize they might have miscalculated. And somewhere out there, on the edges of known space, targets waited that no one else could see, intended to find them one shot at a time.